The gymnasium doors burst open with a metallic crash that silenced 300 voices mid-applause. Federal agents in tactical gear streamed through the entrance, their boots echoing against polished floors as parents clutched programs and children froze in their folding chairs. On stage, 12-year-old Maya Smith stood frozen behind the podium, her academic excellence certificate trembling in her small hands. "Nobody move." The lead agent's voice cut through the stunned silence like a blade. "We're looking for the Smith family. Immigration and Customs Enforcement." Maya's father, Jerome Smith, felt his world tilt sideways. His wife, Denise, gripped his arm with fingernails that bit through his Sunday shirt. Their son, Marcus, 16 and broad-shouldered from varsity basketball, stepped protectively in front of his mother. The family had lived in Millbrook for 8 years. Jerome taught chemistry at the high school. Denise ran the community food bank. They were American citizens, born and raised. "There's been some mistake," Jerome said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his chest. He rose from his seat in the front row, hands visible and non-threatening. "We're citizens. I can show you our documents." The gymnasium buzzed with confused whispers. Children began to cry. Parents pulled out phones, uncertain whether to record or call for help. Principal Sarah Martinez stood at the side of the stage, her face pale but determined. She'd been running Lincoln Middle School for 12 years, but she'd never seen anything like this. "Someone called in a report," the lead agent said, consulting a tablet. "Anonymous tip about illegal immigrants attending this event. We need to see identification from all family members." Jerome's mind raced. Who would do this? Who would call ICE on his family during his daughter's moment of triumph? Maya had just received the district's highest academic honor, a full scholarship to the prestigious Riverside Academy. She'd worked for this moment since kindergarten, staying after school for tutoring, reading until her eyes burned, dreaming of college and law school, and making a difference. "Daddy." Maya's voice cracked over the microphone, small and scared. "What's happening?" From the middle section of bleachers, a woman with platinum blonde hair and perfectly applied makeup leaned forward with satisfaction. Karen Whitmore had watched the Smith family with growing resentment for months. Their house was nicer than hers. Their children were more successful. Jerome Smith made more money teaching than her husband made selling insurance. It wasn't fair, she'd told herself. People like them didn't deserve what they had. Karen had made the call 30 minutes ago from the school parking lot, her voice disguised with a fake accent. "There's illegal immigrants at Lincoln Middle School," she'd whispered into her phone. "They're probably here to scout the place. You need to come right now." She'd expected a simple investigation, maybe some paperwork that would embarrass the family and put them in their place. She hadn't expected tactical gear and terror in a child's eyes. "Sir, we need you to come with us," the agent said to Jerome. "Ma'am, you too." He gestured to Denise. "And the minor male." "Leave my family alone." The voice came from the back of the gymnasium, fierce and unexpected. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly librarian who'd helped Maya with her research projects, stood with her walker, her voice shaking with rage. "That man has been teaching our children for years. This is insane." Other voices joined hers. Parents who knew the Smiths, teachers who worked with Jerome, students who'd been in his classes. The gymnasium filled with a groundswell of protest, but the agents remained unmoved. "We have our orders," the lead agent said. "Please don't interfere with a federal investigation." Jerome felt the weight of every eye in the room. He thought of his grandfather, who'd faced down dogs and fire hoses in Birmingham. He thought of his father, who'd been the first black engineer at the local plant. He thought of Maya, still standing on that stage, watching her hero father being treated like a criminal. "We'll cooperate," he said quietly. "But I want to know who made this call. I want to know who did this to my family." The agents moved forward, and Jerome felt handcuffs click around his wrists. The cold metal bit into his skin as gasps echoed through the gymnasium. Denise was crying now, not from fear, but from rage. Marcus stepped forward, his young face twisted with anger. "Get your hands off my father!" he shouted, his voice cracking with adolescent fury and pain. "Son, don't," Jerome said firmly. "Stay calm. This will get sorted out." But even as he spoke, Jerome felt something breaking inside him. Not just his heart for his children's pain, but his faith in the community he'd served, the country he'd sworn allegiance to, the system he'd believed would protect him if he just worked hard enough and followed all the rules. Principal Martinez had seen enough. She stepped forward, her heels clicking against the wooden stage floor. "Agent!" she called out, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent decades dealing with difficult situations. "I need to speak with you immediately." The lead agent looked up, annoyed. "Ma'am, please step back." "I'm Sarah Martinez, principal of this school. I'm also a licensed attorney in this state." She descended the stage steps with purposeful strides. "Before you proceed any further, I need to inform you that you are potentially violating several federal laws." The agent paused, his grip loosening slightly on Jerome's arm. "What laws?" "The Fourth Amendment protects against unreasonable searches and seizures. Without a warrant or probable cause beyond an anonymous tip, this detention is illegal." Principal Martinez's voice carried the weight of law school training and 20 years of civil rights work before she'd entered education. "Additionally, you're conducting this operation on school property during a public event with minor children present, which violates protocols established in the Torres v. ICE settlement." Jerome stared at his daughter's principal with new respect. He'd known she was smart, but he hadn't known she was a lawyer. Sarah Martinez had given up a lucrative career in civil rights law to become an educator, driven by a belief that she could make more difference shaping young minds than winning court cases. "The detention stands," the agent said, but his voice lacked conviction. "We have reasonable suspicion." Based on what an anonymous call, Principal Martinez pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the district attorney. I'm also calling the ACLU. And I'm calling Channel 7 News. This is going to be very public very quickly." In the bleachers, Karen Whitmore felt her stomach drop. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She'd wanted to cause some trouble, maybe get the family questioned or embarrassed. She hadn't wanted news crews and lawyers and federal agents in tactical gear traumatizing children. But it was too late to stop what she'd started. The wheels of bureaucracy were already in motion, and the Smith family was caught in the machinery. "Mom, what's happening to Mr. Smith?" A 10-year-old girl tugged on her mother's sleeve. Jerome had been her chemistry teacher's aide, helping with science fair projects after school. "Why are they being mean to him?" Her mother, Janet Phillips, felt tears in her eyes. "I don't know, sweetheart, but it's not right." Janet pulled out her phone and started recording. Other parents did the same. Within minutes, live streams were broadcasting the detention to social media platforms. The hashtag #Justice for the Smith family began trending within the hour. Principal Martinez continued her verbal assault on the lead agent, citing case law and constitutional precedents with the precision of a surgeon. Jerome found himself almost smiling, despite the circumstances. Maya's principal was a force of nature, and she was fighting for his family with everything she had. "You have 30 seconds to produce a warrant or release this family," she said, her phone recording every word. "Otherwise, you're going to be the federal agents who illegally detained American citizens at a children's award ceremony. That's not a headline you want." The agent consulted his tablet, then spoke into his radio. Jerome couldn't hear the response, but he saw the uncertainty in the man's eyes. This was supposed to be a simple immigration check, not a constitutional crisis broadcast live to thousands of viewers. Maya stepped down from the stage, her certificate forgotten on the podium. She walked toward her father with the dignity of someone far older than her 12 years. "Daddy, I'm proud of you," she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "You're the bravest man I know." Jerome's heart broke and swelled simultaneously. His daughter was watching him get handcuffed by federal agents, and she was telling him she was proud. He'd raised her right. He realized, whatever happened next, he'd raised a daughter who could find courage in the darkest moments. "I'm proud of you too, baby girl," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You earned that scholarship all by yourself. Nobody can take that away from you." The lead agent received new instructions through his earpiece. Jerome watched his face change, saw the moment when the reality of the situation hit him. This wasn't a routine immigration check anymore. This was a public relations nightmare that would end careers and spawn investigations. "We're going to need to verify your documentation," the agent said, his tone notably different. "But we can do that here, without detaining anyone." Principal Martinez smiled grimly. "I thought you might see reason." The handcuffs came off Jerome's wrists, leaving red marks that would fade, but never be forgotten. Denise rushed to his side, and Marcus wrapped his arms around both parents. Maya joined the family huddle, still clutching her certificate. But the damage was done. The trust had been broken. The safety had been shattered. And somewhere in the bleachers, Karen Whitmore sat frozen with the realization that her moment of malicious spite had just destroyed multiple lives, including her own. The gymnasium slowly emptied as parents took their children home, many stopping to offer support to the Smith family. Jerome accepted their condolences with grace, but inside, he was calculating the cost of what had happened. The humiliation, the trauma to his children, the erosion of his standing in the community. Principal Martinez approached the family as the last of the crowd dispersed. "I'm sorry this happened in our school," she said quietly. "I'm going to make sure there are consequences." "Thank you," Jerome said, "for everything. I didn't know you were a lawyer." "I don't advertise it, but I've been fighting battles like this my whole career." She looked at Maya, who was still holding her certificate. "Don't let them take this moment from you. You earned this honor. You deserve to celebrate." Maya nodded, but her eyes were older now, sadder. She'd learned something about the world that no 12-year-old should have to learn. She'd discovered that excellence and achievement couldn't protect you from hatred and prejudice. As the family walked to their car, Jerome noticed Karen Whitmore sitting alone in the parking lot, still in her vehicle. She was on her phone, gesturing wildly, probably trying to explain to someone what had happened. Jerome felt a moment of pity for her, then pushed it away. She'd made her choice. She'd called ICE on his family, and whatever consequences followed were hers to bear. The drive home was quiet, each family member lost in their own thoughts. Jerome parked in their driveway and sat for a moment, looking at the house he'd worked so hard to afford. The mortgage payments, the property taxes, The endless repairs and improvements, all of it to build a life for his children, to give them opportunities he'd never had. "Will we have to move?" Maya asked from the back seat, her voice small. "No, baby. We're not going anywhere. This is our home." But even as he said it, Jerome wondered if that was true. How could they stay in a community where someone would weaponize federal agents against them? How could they feel safe when their neighbors saw them as threats to be reported rather than friends to be celebrated? Inside the house, the family gathered in the living room. The walls were covered with photos of school events, family vacations, academic achievements, 8 years of building a life in Millbrook, and it had all been threatened by one phone call from one hateful woman. Jerome's phone buzzed with text messages from colleagues, friends, and neighbors. Words of support, offers of help, expressions of outrage. The local news had picked up the story, and it was spreading across social media platforms like wildfire. "Dad, you need to see this," Marcus said, showing his father a Twitter thread. "It's everywhere. Justice for the Smith family is trending." Jerome scrolled through the messages. Support from strangers, condemnation of ICE tactics, calls for investigation and accountability. But also darker messages. People who supported what had happened, who thought he and his family deserved worse. "Turn it off," Denise said firmly. "We don't need to see the hate right now." But the hate was already out there, spreading like a virus through comment sections and private messages. Karen Whitmore's phone call had unleashed something bigger than she'd intended, exposing the fault lines that ran through their community and their country. The next morning brought reporters to their front door. Jerome put on his Sunday clothes and faced the cameras with dignity, Denise by his side. He spoke about his family's contributions to the community, their commitment to education and service, their love for their adopted hometown. "We're not asking for special treatment," he said, his voice steady despite the exhaustion in his eyes. "We're asking for basic respect. We're asking to be seen as neighbors, not threats. We're asking for our children to be safe in their own schools." The reporter, a young woman with kind eyes and a fierce determination, asked the question everyone was thinking. "Do you know who made the call to ICE?" Jerome paused, considering his words carefully. "I have my suspicions, but I believe in justice through proper channels. If someone broke the law by filing a false report, they should face consequences. But I won't participate in a witch hunt." Behind her, drawn curtains. Karen Whitmore watched the news coverage with growing horror. The story had taken on a life of its own, sparking nationwide conversations about immigration enforcement, racial profiling, and the weaponization of federal agencies. Civil rights organizations were getting involved. Politicians were issuing statements. Legal experts were analyzing the constitutional implications. Karen had wanted to cause trouble for one family. Instead, she'd ignited a national controversy that was consuming her life along with theirs. Her phone rang constantly with calls from reporters who'd somehow gotten her number. Her social media accounts were flooded with messages from people who'd figured out her identity through online sleuthing. Her husband had been questioned at work. Her children were being harassed at school. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd wanted to make the Smith family feel unwelcome in their community, and now she was the one who couldn't show her face in public. 3 days after the incident, Principal Martinez called an emergency school board meeting. The auditorium was packed beyond capacity, with overflow crowds watching on screens in the hallways. Local media covered the event live, and national networks sent crews to document the community's response. Jerome and his family sat in the front row, supported by a sea of allies, teachers, parents, students, and community members filled every seat. The demonstration of support was overwhelming, but it couldn't erase the trauma of what had happened. Principal Martinez took the podium with the bearing of someone who'd spent her career fighting for justice. She'd traded her lucrative law practice for a teacher's salary because she believed education was the key to social change. Tonight, she was drawing on both sides of her experience. What happened at our school 3 days ago was not just an attack on one family. She began, her voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium. It was an attack on the values that make our community strong. It was an attack on the principle that excellence and achievement matter more than skin color or perceived origin. The crowd erupted in applause, but she raised her hand for silence. I've spent my career fighting discrimination in courtrooms and classrooms. I've seen how hatred spreads when good people stay silent. Tonight, we will not be silent. She outlined the legal response that was already underway. The district attorney was investigating the false report to ICE. The Department of Education was reviewing the federal agent's actions on school property. The ACLU was considering a civil rights lawsuit. But legal action isn't enough, she continued. We need to examine our own community, our own hearts. We need to ask ourselves how we allowed hatred to flourish in our midst. We need to commit to doing better. Jerome was invited to speak, and he approached the podium with the same dignity he'd shown throughout the ordeal. The auditorium fell silent as he looked out at the crowd, seeing faces he'd known for years, students he'd taught, neighbors he'd helped during difficult times. I want to thank everyone who supported my family, he said, his voice strong despite the emotion behind it. Your words and actions have reminded us that hatred is not the dominant force in our community. Love is stronger. Truth is more powerful. Unity will prevail. He paused, gathering himself for what came next. But I also want to address the person who made that call. I want them to know that their actions didn't just hurt my family. They hurt this entire community. They damaged the trust that holds us together. They betrayed the values we claim to share. In the back of the auditorium, Karen Whitmore sat hidden beneath a baseball cap and sunglasses, her body rigid with shame and fear. She'd come to the meeting out of a perverse need to witness the consequences of her actions. But hearing Jerome's words made her stomach turn. I forgive that person, Jerome continued, and Karen felt tears streaming down her face. I forgive them because hatred is a poison that destroys the person who carries it. But forgiveness doesn't mean there shouldn't be consequences. Actions have results. Choices have costs. The school board voted unanimously to implement new policies protecting students and families from discrimination. They established a community dialogue program to address racial tensions. They created a scholarship fund in Maya's name to support students who overcame adversity through academic excellence. But the most significant moment came when Superintendent Williams took the microphone for the final announcement of the evening. The district attorney has informed us that charges will be filed tomorrow morning against the person who made the false report to ICE. Filing a false report to federal authorities is a felony punishable by up to 5 years in prison and significant fines. The investigation has also revealed that this same individual has made similar false reports in the past, targeting other families in our community. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Karen Whitmore felt the walls closing in around her. The other reports, the other families she'd targeted over the years, all of it was coming to light. Her lawyer had warned her this would happen, but she'd refused to believe it. Additionally, the superintendent continued, we've been in contact with federal authorities about the ICE response to this incident. An investigation is underway into the protocols that allowed armed agents to detain citizens without warrants on school property during a public event. The applause was thunderous. Jerome felt a weight lifting from his shoulders, not because he was vindictive, but because accountability mattered. Justice mattered. The system had to work for everyone, or it worked for no one. As the meeting concluded, people surrounded the Smith family with hugs and words of support. Maya clutched her scholarship certificate, which had been represented to her by the school board, with a formal apology for the interruption of her moment. "I'm going to study law," she announced to her parents as they walked to their car. "I want to fight for families like us. I want to make sure this never happens to anyone else." Jerome smiled, pride swelling in his chest. His daughter had found her calling in the crucible of injustice, transforming trauma into purpose. She would be a formidable lawyer someday, armed with intelligence, compassion, and the hard-won knowledge that the system needed constant vigilance to function properly. The next morning brought news that Karen Whitmore had been arrested at her home. The charges were serious: filing false reports to federal authorities, conspiracy to deprive civil rights, and harassment. Her mugshot appeared on the same news programs that had covered the Smith family's ordeal. Jerome felt no satisfaction in her downfall, only sadness for the waste of it all. Karen could have been an ally, a friend, a positive force in the community. Instead, she'd chosen hatred and paid the ultimate price. The trial, when it came 6 months later, was swift and decisive. Karen's lawyer had urged her to plead guilty and seek a reduced sentence, but she'd refused, convinced that a jury would understand her motivations. She was wrong. The evidence was overwhelming: phone records, witness testimony, a pattern of harassment that stretched back years. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Karen was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison, along with substantial fines and restitution to the families she'd targeted. Her husband filed for divorce. Her children changed their names and moved in with relatives. Her house was sold to pay legal fees and fines. Jerome attended the sentencing hearing, not out of vindictiveness, but out of a sense of civic duty. He wanted to see justice served, but he also wanted to bear witness to the human cost of hatred. Karen looked small and broken in her orange jumpsuit, a shadow of the arrogant woman who'd made that phone call. As she was led away in handcuffs, Jerome felt a moment of genuine sadness for her. She'd destroyed her own life, along with the lives she'd tried to ruin. Hatred was indeed a poison that consumed the person who carried it. Maya's scholarship to Riverside Academy proved to be just the beginning. She excelled in her studies, became student body president, and earned a full scholarship to Harvard Law School. She spent her summers interning with civil rights organizations, learning the tools she'd need to fight injustice. Marcus followed his own path, earning a basketball scholarship to Duke University while maintaining a pre-med track. He wanted to be a doctor, to heal rather than fight. But he carried the lessons of that night with him. He volunteered at free clinics, served underprivileged communities, and never forgot that excellence was the best response to hatred. Jerome continued teaching, but his role evolved beyond the classroom. He became a voice for educational equity, speaking at conferences and workshops about creating inclusive learning environments. His chemistry classes became legendary for their blend of rigorous academics and social consciousness. Denise expanded the food bank into a comprehensive community resource center, providing not just meals, but legal aid, educational support, and advocacy services. The center served all families in need, regardless of background or immigration status. Principal Martinez left education to return to civil rights law. but she remained connected to the Smith family and the community that had rallied around them. She established a foundation that provided legal representation to families facing discrimination, ensuring that no one had to face such challenges alone. The Lincoln Middle School Gymnasium was renamed the Maya Smith Academic Excellence Center, and each year's award ceremony began with a moment of reflection on the values of inclusion, respect, and justice. The incident that had traumatized the community became a catalyst for positive change. 5 years later, Maya returned to speak at the annual award ceremony. She stood at the same podium where she'd once been terrorized, but now she spoke with the authority of someone who'd transformed pain into purpose. "I learned something important that night," she told the audience of students, parents, and teachers. "I learned that hatred is loud, but love is louder. I learned that one person's prejudice can cause tremendous harm, but a community's compassion can heal even the deepest wounds." She looked out at the crowd, seeing faces of every color and background united in support of their children's achievements. "I learned that excellence is not just about grades or awards. True excellence means standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. It means building bridges instead of walls. It means choosing love over fear." The applause was thunderous, but Maya raised her hand for silence, just as Principal Martinez had done years before. "Most importantly, I learned that one moment of hatred cannot define a lifetime of love. One person's prejudice cannot overcome a community's commitment to justice. One night of trauma cannot destroy a future built on hope." As Maya concluded her speech, the audience rose in a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. Jerome wiped tears from his eyes, remembering the scared 12-year-old who'd clutched her certificate while federal agents threatened her family. That girl had become a powerful advocate for justice, a voice for the voiceless, a beacon of hope in a world that often seemed dark. The Smith family's ordeal had ended where it began, in a school gymnasium filled with children and families celebrating achievement. But the community that gathered that night was different from the one that had witnessed their trauma. It was stronger, more united, more committed to the values that made America great. Outside the school, reporters still gathered occasionally when the anniversary of the incident approached. They wanted to revisit the story, to examine how the community had changed, to measure the long-term impact of that night. But the real story wasn't in the headlines, or the court records, or the policy changes. The real story was in the lives that had been transformed, the bridges that had been built, the hatred that had been overcome by love. It was in Maya's decision to study law, in Marcus's commitment to healing, in Jerome's expanded role as an educator and advocate. It was in the community center that served all families, in the scholarship fund that supported students from all backgrounds, in the dialogue programs that brought people together across racial and cultural lines. Karen Whitmore's phone call had been intended to tear the community apart. Instead, it had brought them together in ways that might never have happened otherwise. Her moment of hatred had catalyzed a generation of healing and progress. As the Smith family drove home from Maya's triumphant return to Lincoln Middle School, they passed the house where Karen had once lived. New owners had moved in. A young couple with mixed-race children who played in the yard where Karen had once watched the world with suspicious eyes. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. The house that had harbored hatred now echoed with the laughter of children who represented everything Karen had feared and opposed. Time had a way of correcting injustice, sometimes slowly, sometimes with dramatic finality. Jerome pulled into his driveway and sat for a moment, as he had that night 5 years ago. But this time, he felt only gratitude. Gratitude for his family's strength, for his community's support, for the opportunity to turn trauma into triumph. "Dad," Maya said from the back seat, I've been thinking about that night a lot lately. What about it? I used to hate her for what she did to us, but now I almost feel grateful. Jerome turned to look at his daughter, surprised by her words. She showed me who I wanted to be, Maya continued. She showed me what I wanted to fight against. Without that night, I might never have found my calling. I might never have realized how much work there is to do. Jerome nodded, understanding what she meant. Sometimes the worst moments in life became the catalysts for the best changes. Sometimes hatred, by revealing its true face, inspired people to choose love instead. As they walked into their house, Jerome looked at the walls covered with photos and achievements. 8 years of building a life in Millbrook had become 13 years of building a legacy. The family that had been threatened with deportation had become pillars of their community, proof that excellence in character mattered more than prejudice and fear. The story that had begun with handcuffs and terror had ended with hope and transformation. The community that had watched in horror as a family was humiliated had become a model for inclusive excellence. The girl who'd been traumatized at her award ceremony had become a powerful advocate for justice. And in a federal prison in another state, Karen Whitmore sat in her cell, finally understanding the true cost of hatred. She'd lost everything: her family, her home, her freedom, her future. But perhaps, in the quiet moments between regret and despair, she also understood something else. Perhaps she saw that the family she'd tried to destroy had become stronger, that the community she'd tried to divide had become more united, that the hatred she'd tried to spread had been overcome by love. The story of one phone call had become the story of a community's transformation. The story of one family's trauma had become the story of a generation's commitment to justice. The story of hatred's temporary victory had become the story of love's eternal triumph. And in a gymnasium where children gathered each year to celebrate excellence, Maya Smith's certificate still hung in a place of honor, a reminder that no amount of hatred could diminish the power of achievement, the strength of community, or the triumph of love over fear. The lights in the Smith family home glowed warm and golden as they settled in for the evening. Secure in the knowledge that they were home, they were safe, and they were loved. The nightmare was over. The dream continued.